He's been making some headlines this week. Lando Norris this week has made two major headlines in the world of motorsport. One of them being he's won an award, the FIA. Fair, very fair. He deserves awards. I think this one was for the best British competition driver of the year, which by all means you have to accredit that to him. He's been phenomenal in the last few seasons. Last year was a very strong one for him personally. He outperformed that car, outperformed his teammate. A lot of people didn't really expect that, let's be honest. People really thought Ricciardo was going to have an absolute stormer and just fit straight into that season. And yes, while he won a Grand Prix, it wasn't his strongest year to date. And I think that goes for him really well because Norris is not the most experienced driver in the world. He lost a Grand Prix last year because of the inexperience, one could argue. He was leading the Russian Grand Prix, rain started to come down, and he made perhaps the wrong decision due to a little bit of inexperience. He maybe didn't read the weather conditions the way they should have been read. And you have to say, unfortunately, that is just his fault. He should have listened to the call to come in for his engineers, but that's one mistake he's made, and he'll learn from that. The other big piece of news surrounding him is that he signed a 4-year contract extension at McLaren, which in the world of Formula One, that you don't see that too often. There's a lot of drivers, particularly young ones, you see maybe 2-year contract extensions for most of them. So for him to sign such a long-term deal is significant because it shows the faith McLaren have in him and the faith that he has in McLaren. That's the crucial bit, because he admitted in interviews this week in the press that other teams did come in for him, top teams. You know, in the next couple of seasons, there's going to be a lot of changes in the driver market. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton's retirement is coming up soon, whether that's this season or not. Doubt that. But when his contract does expire, I don't expect him to necessarily sign a new one, certainly not for more than a year. So there's a space there. Perez is getting old. Don't know when he's going to retire. He's in his 30s now. So there's spaces coming up in these top teams. So for him to turn those approaches down instead of McLaren shows a lot. And I think he's possibly the most exciting young driver in the sport right now. Obviously, there's cases to be made for Alex Albon and George Russell. But I'd argue against George Russell because he now has the most exciting package. He's at the Mercedes, he's not really been able to show what he can really truly do in a Williams. He's outperformed that car massively a lot of times. Obviously, he stuck it on the podium, but there's an asterisk on that because half points were scored in that race because of the weather conditions not allowing them to race. So that's a problem for him. But the other thing about George Russell is we know his potential, but he's there already. We've seen him race in Mercedes before, and I still believe that he had all the capabilities and probably should have won that race. So we know how exciting he is. He's not necessarily up and coming now because he's got the top seat. I think Lando Norris is still up and coming because he's at McLaren. There's a project there. He was at the team when Alonso was still driving for them, and we know how that one went in Alonso's second stint. Yeah, McLaren Honda era wasn't the nicest when you talk about the more recent collaboration between those two companies. It was a disaster. So Norris has come from that level at McLaren, and he's brought the team to finish third and fourth in consecutive seasons. And Ferrari really deserved that third place last season. You have to say they were on such a comeback from the season before where they lost their place in the top three, and McLaren obviously took that from them. But the other thing about Lando Norris is you have to remember he could have won a race last season, probably should have done, but he was also part of McLaren's first one too for going on for 10 years alongside Daniel Ricciardo. So there's a lot of scope to get excited there. And that contract extension obviously will have come with a pay rise, but for such a long-term extension, I think that's the exciting thing. I think he could be the next British world champion that isn't Lewis Hamilton. I can't see George Russell outscoring Lewis in the next 2 seasons, but you don't know. These regulations really could shake things up. And McLaren, who's to say they're not going to be the top team? But nevertheless, I think that this contract extension for Lando is great news for him, great news for McLaren, but also great news for us and the sport because he is a very exciting young driver and will only improve and improve and improve. And this year might be the year that he gets his first Grand Prix victory.